Ghost Following Me. The story was submitted to the site by Country Olive from Iowa. When I was 13, I went to a very well-known haunted house with a tour group. There was known child activity, so I had taken a light uh, up to interact with the spirits. It didn't take long before I was interacting with a child spirit. I told my mother before I left that I felt sorry for the child spirit, and I wished I could take them out of the house because I did not like them being stuck there. I went on with my life. Things would happen that I couldn't explain, but it was nothing big. When I turned 19, I got my first real job at a care facility. The first 2 years I worked there, nothing extraordinary happened. When one night, as I was goofing off with a coworker, I started to randomly sing "I'm a Little Teapot," but I didn't finish the full song. But as little girl's voice did finish it, it was a little girl's voice that finished it, loud and clear, and both my coworker and I heard it. Soon after that, the little girl became very active. We would hear her playing in the hallway, and a couple of times we would see her. And it wasn't just me and the other coworker I had been working with that night. It had been at least 4 other staff who had seen her. I ended up going to another job at a nursing home, not thinking much about the little girl. There was one resident who would always talk to someone I could not see when I was with her in the room. Another staff mentioned didn't do it unless I was there. One day the resident told me it was so nice of me to bring my little sister to work with me. So I started to get curious and ask her questions. She described the little girl as the same ghost child that I'd seen at my previous job. So later that night, I called my old coworkers and asked about the activity, and they said it had been quiet. That night, I woke up to my dog, who had no aggressive behavior in their bones, standing over me protectively as she stared at my open bedroom door. And there stood the little girl, clear as day. Before I would only get glimpses, but this time she was full body, as if she was an actual person standing in my doorway. She smiled at me, then giggled and ran away. I quickly got out of my bed to see where she had gone, but there was no sign of her, and I know it could not have been some random child who had found its way into my apartment. There was no one else in my house and no way to escape without my noticing. The apartment was small, but large enough that if a child had run from the door, I would have seen them leave. For the next 3 years, the same resident would have conversations with my sister, quote unquote, and a few other residents also mentioned my sister, quote unquote. I never engaged with the spirit, just let her be. Every once in a while, she would let me know she was there, playing with the lights. Her favorite thing is playing with water. But anyway, I just went on with life, even though I knew she was there. But when I left the nursing home, I did make a request. I asked her to stay with the woman who had originally seen her. The woman had no family left, and it was always so lonely, but always seemed excited to see my little sister. Now, I didn't know if it worked. I never asked my old co-workers if she had stayed or not, but I did not notice things happening that the little girl would do. When I was 25, I ended up in a bad relationship. I ended up getting pregnant and coming home to live with my parents. Now my parents have 2 homes, and both could be considered haunted. My dad is very sensitive and always makes a deal with spirits in the home. Then that he would not get rid of them as long as they did not harm us. So the house I grew up in had an old farmer who has only shown himself a couple of times. The other house that my parents remodeled has a woman who had once babysat my dad. She's very active, but it's not bad, just letting us know that she's around. Where am I going with this, that I live with my childhood home? The activity was slim to none till after I had my son. I would notice the things that the little girl used to do starting happening again, and my son, still a small baby, would watch something move around him. As he got older, the activity died down, so I thought little of it, thinking maybe it was a family member coming to say hi. When my son was 2, I got a job at daycare. This daycare had once been a funeral home and had activity from the start and to the point a boss had the place smudged. I didn't get rid, it did not get rid of all the activity though. And the baby room that I worked in, there was a toy that would sing when touched activated. I don't know why, but it was my favorite of mine, and I would use it to play with the babies almost every day, till it started to sing on its own. The song was getting a bit annoying because it would go off multiple times a day. So we opened the back to check the batteries to find that it never had batteries at all. My coworker quickly put the toy away, and we didn't talk about it again. But other coworkers would talk about all the activities they experienced. But one thing always stuck out to me. The water would randomly turn on in the room my son was in, and that toy only worked when I had been around. I left the daycare for a short time to help a friend out with her restaurant, but my son stayed in the same daycare. One day his teacher informed me that he and another little boy had become close, but they would not play with each other with other children, but they always mentioned the same name. So she asked me if there was some kind of show that had a lead character named Ina, I-N-A. I had never heard of it, and soon it was forgotten. That was till I went back a year later. It wasn't in the baby room anymore. I worked as a preschool teacher assistant. That's when I noticed my son was still playing by himself. When I asked him why, he said he wasn't alone. Ina played with him. I figured he had an imaginary friend. The name seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place why. A year later, my son was in my preschool class. I had moved from an assistant to the lead teacher and was having issues with another coworker that worked in a room downstairs. She had left for the night, but I would hear someone down in the room, so I went to check to make sure a child had not been left behind. The coworker was very organized and OCD, but when I walked downstairs, her room was a disaster, as if a child had a tantrum and had thrown things around the room. And that is when I saw her, the same little girl I had seen so many times. She looked up at me and said, "That teacher is mean to you." She was then gone, as if she hadn't been standing right in front of me. I quickly got the room picked up and asked her not to destroy the room again. Out of curiosity, I contacted an old co-worker from the nursing home and asked how the one resident was doing. I was then informed that she had passed away a few months after my son was born, but she would still talk to someone up till her last day. After that, if I ever had a disagreement with a staff member, the activity around them became scarier. Or new staff would come to me with white faces explaining some unexplained occurrences happened to them. I got a new assistant after the last one refused to come back and never explained why. That's when I witnessed what was going on to the new staff. My assistant went into the craft closet and supplies flew out at her. Nothing dangerous, but scary nonetheless. Later that day, when the kids were gone, I sat down with a staff member and talked to the little girl. I introduced her to my assistant and asked her to play nice. The toy with no battery started to sing right after that, but the assistant never had an issue after that. I also started to notice that when I drove past my job there and looked up at the big windows, the little girl would be standing there and would wave. I was curious to see if it was just me who would see this, so I took a few friends to my job, and as I did, they all seemed to pale. And I asked them what they saw individually and away from each other when we got home. They all described the little girl. One friend was very into the paranormal and started to ask me questions, so I told her about the experiences I had encountered and how this little girl seemed to keep showing up at my jobs. It's then that I mentioned my son's imaginary friend, Ina. This piqued my friend's interest, so she brought up some information on the local haunted house and showed me a photo of a girl. I couldn't believe it. It was the little girl I had been seeing. She then showed me the information below the photo. Her name had been Ina, and she had been murdered in that local haunted house I had visited. I was a bit shocked, but it was more the fact that this child had been following me since I was 13 years old. I am now 30 years old, and I had asked Ina to watch over the daycare and the children when I had left a year ago. My boss said there were a few incidents, but nothing bad. Just tonight, before I started to write this, I saw Ina again, but something feels different. It felt like she was hiding from me. I have always seen her straight on or out of the corner of my eye, but tonight I saw her through a mirror. It was unnerving. I feel like she's angry with me, and I'm unsure what to do about it. This is on Unexplained Mysteries. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.